I'm a 46-year-old lady having a beautiful figure, full of hotness, alone in my house. Here is my story that will shock you all. I was standing naked in the kitchen when suddenly my stepson walked in, and his eyes saw everything. My heart pounded as Scott froze in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to something I couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension in the room was thick, like the air before a storm. "Mom," his voice cracked, betraying the whirlwind of emotions I knew he was trying to hide. I grabbed the dish rag from the counter, desperately trying to cover myself. "Scott, you're not supposed to be here." "I forgot my wallet," he stammered, holding it up as if it could justify the collision of our worlds. In that moment, I turned away, my face burning with humiliation. This isn't what it looks like. I wasn't expecting anyone." His silence was deafening. I dared a glance over my shoulder and caught the way his eyes lingered, betraying thoughts he wasn't saying out loud. "Right," he finally muttered, his tone strained. "I didn't mean to—" He trailed off, taking a step back but not looking away. Before he could leave, I blurted out, "Please, Scott, just forget this ever happened." My voice trembled with an urgency I couldn't hide. He hesitated, his hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, but the look in his eyes told a different story. As soon as he was gone, I pressed my hands to my face, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. My pulse thundered, and an undeniable spark lingered in the air. One that terrified me more than anything else. If you're already hooked, don't forget to hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that'll leave you on the edge of your seat. The tension from the kitchen lingered as I hurried upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind me. My hands trembled as I pulled on a robe, my mind racing with the memory of Scott's expression. It wasn't just shock I'd seen in his eyes, it was something deeper, something that shouldn't have been there. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. "It was nothing," I whispered to myself. "It didn't mean anything." But the knot in my stomach told me I wasn't convincing anyone, least of all myself. A soft knock on the door made me jump. My heart hammered as I hesitated, then called out, "Yes?" "It's me," Scott's voice came through, quiet but insistent. I opened the door just a crack, my pulse quickening as his face came into view. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound composed. I didn't mean to make things awkward," he said, his eyes flickering between me and the floor. "You didn't," I lied, the heat rising to my cheeks again. "It's forgotten." Okay, but he didn't leave. Instead, he lingered, his hand resting on the doorframe. "You're sure?" "Yes, Scott, please." My voice wavered, betraying my own uncertainty. He nodded slowly, stepping back, but before he turned to leave, he looked at me again, his eyes locking onto mine. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken promise. I shut the door quickly, leaning against it as my knees threatened to give way. Why did his words feel like an invitation to something I couldn't allow myself to consider? Downstairs, I heard the front door close, signaling that he'd left. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. As the hours passed, my thoughts kept circling back to that moment in the kitchen. It wasn't just what had happened, it was the way. It had made me feel the forbidden thrill of being seen in a way no one else had seen me in years. Have you ever had a moment you couldn't take back? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories that'll keep you guessing what happens next. That evening, the house was eerily quiet. I couldn't shake the tension that had settled over me like a second skin. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed amplified. I busied myself with chores, hoping monotony would silence my thoughts, but it only made them louder. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my trance. I peeked through the curtains and saw Scott stepping out, his expression unreadable. My pulse quickened. "What is he doing back?" I muttered, my heart pounding as I tried to steady myself. The front door opened and his voice carried up the stairs. "Nancy, are you here?" I hesitated before responding. "Yes." "Something wrong?" He appeared in the doorway of the living room, his presence filling the space in a way that felt almost suffocating. He held up a bag. "I thought you might want dinner. Figured you didn't have time to cook today." The gesture was unexpected, and it caught me off guard. "That's thoughtful of you," I said cautiously, taking the bag from his hand. I didn't want things to be weird between us. As he said this, his eyes met mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "So I thought maybe we could talk." "Scott, there's nothing to talk about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the way he was looking at me like he was searching for something made it impossible to ignore the weight of the unspoken tension between us. "Nothing?" he repeated, stepping closer. "Because it feels like there's something neither of us wants to admit." I froze, the air around me suddenly charged. "You're imagining things," I whispered, but even I didn't believe my own words. "I'm not," he said firmly. "You felt it too, didn't you?" I opened my mouth to protest, to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was there, hovering between us, undeniable and dangerous. The sound of my phone ringing shattered the moment. I scrambled to grab it, grateful for the distraction. As I answered, Scott's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the chaos in my mind. The night stretched on, but sleep was elusive. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning out of control. Every moment with Scott replayed in my mind, each one more vivid than the last. The way he looked at me tonight, like he could see right through me, was impossible to forget. A soft knock on my bedroom door jolted me upright. My heart raced as I stared at the door, unsure if I'd imagined it. Then there it was again, quieter this time, but unmistakable. "Who is it?" I called, my voice trembling. "It's me," Scott's voice came through, barely above a whisper. I hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "What do you want, Scott? It's late." "Can we talk, just for a minute?" he pleaded. I shouldn't have opened the door. I knew that, but my hands seemed to move on their own, turning the knob and pulling it open just enough to see him standing there, his expression shadowed by the dim hallway light. "This isn't a good idea," I said softly, but he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice raw. "Not after everything." I swallowed hard, my resolve slipping. "There's nothing to talk about." "That's not true, Nancy," he said, his tone steady. "You felt it too in the kitchen tonight. Every time we're in the same room, it's there." His words cut through my defenses, leaving me exposed. "Scott, we can't do this," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his eyes searching mine. I need to know I'm not crazy, that it wasn't all in my head." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The walls I built around myself crumbled, and before I could think, the truth spilled out. "You're not crazy." The confession hung in the air, electric and irreversible. He stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice barely audible. "Neither do I," he replied, his tone heavy with meaning. We stood there, caught in a moment we both knew we couldn't take back. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, but the warmth did little to chase away the heaviness lingering in the house. I moved through my routine in a haze, hoping the day would bring some clarity, but all I felt was a deeper sense of unease. Scott was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. As I entered, his expression was a careful mix of calm and curiosity. "Good morning," he said, his tone unusually soft. "Morning," I replied, avoiding his gaze as I poured myself a cup of coffee. The silence between us was thick, yet neither of us made an effort to break it. Finally he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "About last night." I froze, my fingers tightening around the mug. "Scott, please, we don't need to talk about it." "Yes, we do," he insisted, stepping closer. "I can't just pretend it didn't happen." "You have to," I said firmly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "There's no other choice." He shook his head, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "How can you say that after everything?" "Because it's the truth," I replied, my voice trembling. "We can't do this, Scott. It's wrong." "Wrong?" he echoed, his tone laced with disbelief. "All just complicated." His words struck a nerve and I felt my resolve weakening. "Both," I admitted, barely above a whisper. Scott stepped even closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Then why does it feel so impossible to ignore?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I'd been asking myself the same question, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with an explanation that satisfied the storm of emotions inside me. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell between us. My husband was home. Panic surged through me as I stepped back, creating a safe distance between us. "You need to leave," I said quickly, my voice urgent. Scott's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "This isn't over," he said quietly, before walking past me and heading out the back door. As the front door opened and my husband's cheerful greeting filled the house, I forced a smile, bracing myself for the weight of the secret I now carried. The lines were blurring and secrets were piling up. What will happen next? Hit like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for the next explosive twist. That evening, the house felt like a pressure cooker. The weight of unspoken words and hidden emotions threatened to explode. My husband, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, sat on the couch engrossed in a sports broadcast. I busied myself in the kitchen, hoping the clatter of dishes would drown out my thoughts, but every sound, every shadow seemed to amplify the tension in the room. Scott hadn't come downstairs since my husband's return, and I silently prayed it would stay that way. Just as I allowed myself to relax, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart sank as Scott walked in, his presence immediately drawing my husband's attention. "There's the man of the hour," my husband said cheerfully. "How's the project going?" Scott glanced at me before responding. "Good. It's coming along." The conversation carried on, the casual banter between them feeling like a cruel twist of fate. I kept my head down, focusing on the task at hand, until my husband's laughter broke through my thoughts. "You should take a break, Scott," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've been working so hard." Scott's eyes flickered toward me, a shadow of something unspoken passing between us. "Maybe I will," he said, his tone neutral. "Well, I'm as bad heading to bed," my husband announced, stretching as he stood. "Don't stay up too late." As soon as he left the room, the atmosphere shifted. It grew heavy, charged with a tension neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Scott leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. "It's my house too," reminded me. His words stung, a sharp reminder of the complicated dynamic we were trapped in. "Please," I said, turning to face him. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm not trying to," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "But every time I see you, it's like I can't breathe, and I know you feel it too." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat. He stepped closer, his proximity overwhelming. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I can't," I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. For a moment, we stood there, the silence between us louder than any words. Then the faint creak of the floorboards upstairs snapped us both back to reality. "We can't do this," I whispered, stepping away. "I know," he said, his voice laced with regret. "But it doesn't change anything." The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances, unspoken words, and suffocating tension. Every interaction with Scott felt like walking a razor's edge, and every moment around my husband was laced with guilt. I knew the walls were closing in, yet I couldn't seem to stop myself from spiraling deeper. One night, as my husband announced he'd be working late, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The house was eerily quiet after he left, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every heartbeat. I retreated to my room, hoping to lose myself in a book, but the knock at my door shattered any illusion of calm. "Come in," I said, already knowing who it was. Scott stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him, leaning against it as if bracing himself. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Scott, please," I began, but he held up a hand, cutting me off. "No, Nancy, this can't go on. I can't keep pretending everything's normal when it's not." I set the book aside, my hand trembling. "What do you want me to say? That I feel it too? That I think about you every second I'm awake and dream about you every second I'm not? What difference does it make?" He crossed the room in 2 swift steps, his intensity leaving me breathless. "It makes every difference," he said. "Because if you feel even half of what I do, then we owe it to ourselves to figure out what this is." Tears welled in my eyes as I shook my head. "There's nothing to figure out. We both know this is impossible." "Impossible doesn't mean it's not real," he countered, his voice low and steady. I turned away, unable to face the weight of his gaze. "What are we supposed to do, Scott? Blow up our lives? Hurt everyone we care about?" He placed a hand on my shoulder, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "I don't have all the answers, Nancy, but I know I can't keep living like this, pretending I don't feel what I feel for you." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I turned to face him, my resolve crumbling under the intensity of his stare. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. The moment our lips met, the world seemed to fall away. It was a kiss born of desperation and longing, of all the emotions we'd buried finally coming to the surface. But as the moment stretched on, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered our fragile reality. We broke apart, panic flooding through us as we realized my husband had returned earlier than expected. "We can't do this," I whispered, my voice shaking. Scott nodded, his expression conflicted. "But it's too late, Nancy. The line has been crossed, but the fallout is just beginning. Don't miss the shocking conclusion. Like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories." As the dust settled, Nancy's world was left in chaos. The forbidden moment she shared with Scott, became a tangled web of emotions she couldn't escape. Every glance, every word, every memory was a reminder of the line they had crossed, a line that could never be erased. Scott found himself caught between his growing feelings for Nancy and the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. The choices they made in fleeting moments of weakness had unleashed a storm that neither of them could control. Nancy tried to return to normal, clinging to the life she had built with her husband, but the weight of her secret was too much to bear. Her husband's love, his trust, his unwavering affection, they were like daggers, cutting deeper with each passing day. Scott, meanwhile, wrestled with his own torment. The once clear boundaries of their relationship were now blurred, and every interaction with Nancy only deepened his conflict. He wanted to let go, to move on, but his heart refused to obey. In the end, their story was not one of happy endings or clear resolutions. It was a tale of human frailty, of desires that defied logic, and emotions that couldn't be contained. They were bound together by their mistakes, forever changed by the choices they had made. Nancy and Scott's actions left an undeniable mark, a testament to the complexity of love, betrayal, and the haunting question, what if? I hope you all like my story. If you liked this story, kindly share your comments. Also, like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks.